What began as a routine call for a possible gunshot quickly spiraled into a tense standoff filled with conflicting stories, resistance, and escalating conflict. This four-stage breakdown reveals how one night in a quiet neighborhood became a high-stakes test of police procedure, crowd control, and the fragile balance between law enforcement and community trust. The incident began in what should have been a routine evening for the police. This part of the incident, a call reporting gunshots in a residential neighborhood. The first moments of the case were filled with confusion, tension, and uncertainty. Officers arrived at the scene with caution, aware that gunshot reports often lead to volatile situations. Their initial goal was simple: assess the scene, determine whether shots had indeed been fired, and identify any possible suspects. Upon arrival, officers quickly began gathering witnesses and residents to understand what had happened. A stream of voices, some anxious, some defensive, filled the air. Officers were faced with contradictory statements. Some witnesses confirmed hearing gunshots, others thought it was fireworks. This uncertainty created a chaotic atmosphere where officers had to carefully separate fact from speculation. The scene at 509 Engelhart Terrace was noisy, full of shouting, overlapping voices, and individuals coming to the door, each offering their version of events. The officers' first task was to identify who lived in the area and whether anyone inside the apartments was armed. They approached the building cautiously and asked several residents to step outside. Residents responded hesitantly, some confused about why police were there. The confusion over apartment numbers, whether it was apartment A or apartment B, delayed officers' initial progress. This hesitation reflected the residents' uncertainty and possible apprehension about police involvement. One officer began questioning an individual named Senora. She was reluctant to comply initially, requesting clarification, which slowed the process. Multiple officers coordinated to gather all residents outside. The scene showed early signs of tension. Officers insisted on controlling movement, instructing people to come outside and make sure no one leaves. They wanted to ensure no one could conceal weapons or destroy evidence while maintaining control of the situation. When officers made contact with Senora, she admitted there were people inside the apartment, her husband and children. Officers asked everyone to come outside, but confusion persisted. Senora insisted she was telling the truth, while officers sought confirmation. This questioning revealed early challenges of communication and trust. Residents seemed defensive, possibly due to fear of repercussions or misunderstanding police intentions. Officers also attempted to determine whether there was a weapon inside the apartment. This became a critical point. Residents denied any knowledge of firearms. They suggested what was heard might have been fireworks, but other witnesses told a different story. They described seeing someone in a tight orange shirt aiming over a dumpster and firing. The conflicting testimonies intensified the difficulty for police to pinpoint the truth. Witness statements were crucial at this stage. Officers documented claims from multiple sources. These statements described both gunfire and possible involvement of people leaving in a white Mustang. The descriptions were detailed, down to clothing, color, showing witnesses had paid close attention. But this detail also made the scene more complicated. Officers were forced to juggle conflicting versions of events, trying to separate fact from perception. While officers gathered this information, they faced a physical challenge, persuading residents to comply with police instructions. This was complicated by cultural, emotional, and situational factors. Several residents resisted leaving their apartments, unsure of the reason for the request and fearing legal consequences. Some seemed willing to discuss the situation, while others were defensive or reluctant. Officers repeatedly asked for cooperation, explaining the situation, but the tension remained. Officers also had to handle children and family members present at the scene. Several residents brought children outside, sometimes hesitantly, while officers emphasized the need for safety. The officers' instructions, to have everyone outside with their hands visible, reflected their concern for safety and control. This requirement was both a precaution and a step toward establishing order in a tense environment. As officers gathered more residents outside, the scene became increasingly crowded. Confusion intensified, with multiple voices competing for attention. Officers remained firm, maintaining authority while attempting to avoid escalating conflict. They directed residents in a calm but assertive manner, reminding them of the seriousness of the situation. At the same time, officers worked to identify the potential suspect described by witnesses, a person in an orange shirt. This added urgency to their actions. The residents' responses varied. Some were cooperative, while others were defensive or evasive. Several denied knowledge of firearms or the reported gunshots, insisting they had been celebrating with fireworks. Officers had to consider this possibility carefully. The difference between gunfire and fireworks might seem minor, but for law enforcement, it was critical, because firearms discharge in a residential area posed a direct risk to public safety and required immediate investigation. By the end of this initial stage, officers had made some progress. They had gathered multiple witnesses, identified residents, and isolated individuals connected to the reports, but the situation was far from resolved. The conflicting statements and reluctance of some residents to cooperate pointed to deeper issues of trust, communication, and community relations. The officers knew that resolving the case depended on careful questioning, thorough investigation, and patience, all while ensuring the safety of everyone on scene. This opening segment of the incident set the tone for what would follow. It showed the complexity of responding to a gunshot report in a residential neighborhood, the need for rapid fact-finding, the challenge of dealing with conflicting witness statements, and the difficulty of maintaining order in a tense, emotionally charged situation. This section also highlighted the human side of policing, balancing safety, communication, and the responsibility to act decisively in uncertain circumstances. By the close of Section 1, the stage was set for escalation. Officers had gathered enough information to proceed, but the real challenge, determining the truth, identifying the suspect, and managing resistance, was still ahead. Following the tense initial engagement, Section 2 of this incident focuses on the escalation, the moment when officers shifted from fact-gathering to active crowd control, suspect isolation, and conflict management. This part of the incident reveals the difficulties officers faced in balancing investigative procedure with maintaining safety and order in a highly charged environment. The first challenge officers faced was gaining compliance from residents. By this point, several people were outside the building, but confusion remained about who was involved in the reported shooting. Officers requested that everyone step outside with their hands visible, a standard tactic to ensure no hidden weapons were present. However, compliance was uneven. Some residents hesitated, others questioned the request, and a few openly resisted. The officers had to repeat instructions multiple times, signaling both the residents' uncertainty and the difficulty of enforcing compliance without provoking hostility. One resident, Senora, continued to resist leaving her apartment, insisting she had nothing to hide. She attempted to explain the situation, mentioning family members inside and denying knowledge of gunfire. This back and forth with officers underscored an important challenge in such situations: communication barriers, language differences, emotional distress, and mistrust of police can all hinder cooperation. Officers had to navigate these obstacles carefully, reiterating the importance of stepping outside and keeping hands visible while explaining the legal necessity of these actions. Amid these tensions, officers had to manage multiple priorities. They needed to identify potential suspects, verify witness statements, and ensure no one left the scene before the investigation was complete. To accomplish this, they began systematically questioning residents. Officers asked who lived in which apartment, who was present during the incident, and whether anyone had knowledge of firearms. The answers were inconsistent. Some residents claimed they were celebrating with fireworks, while others denied hearing any gunshots at all. This conflicting testimony made it difficult for officers to establish a clear narrative. The officers also had to handle the issue of the witness who reported seeing a suspect in a tight-fitting orange shirt. This detail became a focal point in the investigation. Officers asked repeatedly whether anyone could confirm seeing such a person. Residents were evasive. Some said they had no idea. Others denied involvement. This lack of clarity heightened tension. Officers were aware that identifying the suspect described by witnesses was essential to progressing the investigation, yet they had to do so without inflaming the situation further. Tensions rose as the number of residents outside grew. Families, friends, and bystanders clustered together, some watching passively while others engaged directly with officers. This mixture of cooperation, skepticism, and outright defiance created a volatile atmosphere. Officers had to maintain control without escalating hostility. They moved strategically, dividing responsibilities. Some questioned residents, others monitored entrances, and a few managed the perimeter. This division of labor was necessary to prevent chaos and keep the investigation on track. A key moment in this stage was when officers requested that everyone step away from the building. This was not simply about gathering statements, it was about securing a controlled environment for the investigation. Officers wanted to isolate the suspect and reduce interference. However, several residents resisted, questioning the legitimacy of the request. This resistance reflected deeper issues: mistrust of law enforcement, fear of legal repercussions, and the instinct to protect family members. Officers were forced to assert their authority, insisting that compliance was non-negotiable for safety and legal reasons. As officers pressed forward, they began separating individuals of interest from the crowd. This process involved careful questioning and observation. They asked specific questions about who had been inside certain apartments, who knew about the gunfire, and who could corroborate witness statements. These questions were strategic. Officers needed to triangulate the truth from a tangle of conflicting accounts. This part of the process required patience and precision, as officers sought to avoid wrongful accusations while ensuring the investigation moved forward. Another critical element of this escalation was controlling the narrative. In any incident of this nature, rumors and misinformation can spread quickly, heightening tension. Officers had to manage both the physical scene and the information flowing from it. They repeatedly addressed residents, asking them to focus on the investigation and refrain from speculation. This effort reflected an awareness that uncontrolled narratives could derail the investigation and complicate their ability to restore order. The officers also faced logistical challenges. They had to ensure that children and vulnerable individuals were safe, while also keeping the crowd under control. Several residents had brought children outside, and officers needed to balance their investigative duties with the responsibility to protect these minors. This involved asking some residents to step aside, explaining procedures clearly, and ensuring that no one was placed in unnecessary danger during the questioning. By the end of this stage, the situation had clearly shifted from initial confusion to active control. Officers had isolated several individuals for further questioning and established a perimeter to secure the scene. They had gathered witness accounts, though these were still contradictory, and focused their attention on verifying whether gunfire had indeed occurred and identifying any responsible parties. The scene remained tense, with residents expressing both cooperation and resistance, and officers maintaining a careful balance between assertiveness and de-escalation. This escalation phase reveals the complexity of handling a potential gunfire incident in a residential area. It is not simply about identifying a suspect, it is about managing human behavior, communication barriers, and conflicting narratives. For the officers, this meant navigating a delicate balance, acting decisively to secure the scene while avoiding unnecessary escalation that could endanger both the public and the officers themselves. After repeated refusals to cooperate and continued verbal confrontations, the officers prepared to escalate the situation. Their priority remained ensuring the safety of both the woman and her children while resolving the standoff peacefully. The officers continued to attempt to engage with her calmly, explaining the legal necessity for sobriety testing and welfare checks. "We want to avoid arrest if possible, but we need to determine whether you are able to drive," one officer explained. The woman, however, refused to engage in any cooperative process, stating multiple times that she had done nothing wrong. The woman's responses grew more inconsistent. At times she responded with mockery and sarcasm, and at other times with defiance. She challenged the officers repeatedly, questioning their authority and the reasons for their actions. She said phrases such as, "I'm not going to respond to honey," "You don't know me, and I want to go home," while refusing all requests to step out of the vehicle or submit to sobriety testing. Her tone vacillated between hostile aggression and an almost playful disregard for authority, which frustrated the officers. Officers tried to reiterate their concerns for her welfare and the welfare of her children. They explained that her slurred speech, erratic behavior, and refusal to answer questions required further investigation. The woman ignored these explanations, instead continuing to mock and belittle the officers. She made repeated demands that she be allowed to leave immediately, while calling them derogatory names and challenging their presence at the scene. At one point, officers asked again if she had taken alcohol or any substances that day. She gave no clear answer, instead repeating vague remarks and refusing to comply with sobriety testing. They explained that their main concern was her safety and the safety of others on the road. Still, she refused to cooperate. This refusal to submit to testing left officers with little choice but to prepare for arrest. During the ongoing interaction, the officers noted her repeated attempts to re-enter the vehicle despite clear instructions not to. This behavior was dangerous and further complicated the situation. Officers gave her multiple warnings, asking her to step away from the car for her safety. She ignored those commands, continued arguing, and made sarcastic remarks about the officers' requests. At times she laughed, at other times she became verbally confrontational. The officers also noticed the presence of several water bottles inside the vehicle. They asked her about their contents, suspecting they could be relevant to her state of intoxication. She refused to answer and instead mocked the request, saying, "Go sniff it," and making other sarcastic comments. Her defiance and hostility suggested she was unwilling to provide any helpful information. This further strained the officers' ability to de-escalate the situation. In an effort to diffuse tensions, officers reminded her that they wanted to avoid arrest if possible. They explained that cooperating would make the process easier and less stressful for everyone. She rejected these suggestions outright, asserting her right to refuse testing and insisting that she had done nothing wrong. Her refusal to cooperate continued despite repeated explanations of the legal requirements and the officers' concerns for safety. The two children remained in the patrol vehicle under supervision. Officers had placed them there earlier to keep them safe and dry, away from the verbal confrontation between their mother and the police. They reassured the children that their mother's situation was being handled and that they would be safe. Their children were visibly upset, watching their mother's interaction with the officers. Their presence added urgency to the situation, as the officers were aware that any escalation could affect the children's emotional well-being. Officers decided that a mental health professional should be brought to the scene to evaluate her condition. They informed her of this plan. She responded dismissively, continuing to resist all instructions and making sarcastic remarks about their efforts. Her behavior suggested that she did not recognize the seriousness of the situation. She insisted she should be allowed to leave, repeatedly stating she had done nothing wrong and accusing officers of targeting her unfairly. The woman's resistance escalated when officers attempted again to have her step out of the vehicle. She became louder, refusing to comply and insisting on her right to stay inside. Officers warned her multiple times that failure to comply would result in her being placed under arrest. She ignored these warnings, continuing to verbally challenge them. Her behavior became increasingly erratic, making it difficult for officers to maintain control of the situation. As officers prepared for further action, they continued to explain that their main concern was safety. They emphasized that their goal was not to punish her but to ensure that she was not a danger to herself or others. The woman's responses remained unpredictable. At times, she mocked them. At other times, she became defensive or sarcastic. Her refusal to cooperate left officers with no choice but to escalate. Eventually, the officers decided they would have to physically remove her from the vehicle if she continued to refuse to step out. They warned her again of the consequences of non-compliance, explaining that they wanted to avoid using force but could not allow her to remain in the vehicle in her current state. She continued to resist verbally, making mocking remarks, refusing to acknowledge their authority, and insisting on her right to go home at the same time. The officers continued to document her behavior and collect evidence. They made clear that her repeated refusal to cooperate, her erratic actions, and her inability to answer questions about her condition and substances taken left them no alternative but to proceed with arrest for the safety of all involved. They coordinated among themselves to ensure they would be able to safely remove her without endangering themselves or the children. By the end of this stage of the encounter, it was evident that the woman would not comply voluntarily. Her continued defiance, refusal to answer questions, refusal to perform sobriety tests, and attempts to re-enter the vehicle created a clear risk. Officers prepared to take her into custody, ensuring the safety of everyone present and arranging for her to be evaluated by medical and mental health professionals once she was secure. The situation was tense, unresolved, and approaching a critical point where arrest would be unavoidable unless she cooperated. Section 4 of this incident moves into the resolution and aftermath, the phase where the chaos begins to settle. Suspects are processed, evidence is confirmed, and officers finalize their response. This stage is important because it shows not only how the incident concluded but also the consequences for those involved and the broader implications for both police procedure and community relations. By this point, officers had detained the suspect, identified through witness statements and corroborated by evidence. Multiple residents had been removed from the scene to allow investigators to work with less interference, and a perimeter had been maintained. Officers now shifted focus to clarifying exactly what had happened and ensuring due process was followed for those taken into custody. A key development in this stage was the revelation of the true cause of the gunfire. Through questioning and evidence examination, officers discovered that the suspect, Martinez, had fired rounds into the air to celebrate his grandmother's arrival in America on a 10-year visa. This explanation, while unusual, added an important layer of context. It also highlighted how initial assumptions, often formed under chaotic circumstances, can differ significantly from reality. This was a turning point in understanding the incident, and it shaped the officers' approach to processing the suspects. The discovery of bullet casings near Martinez's vehicle was crucial. It not only confirmed gunfire, but also directly linked the suspect to the discharge of a firearm. This evidence justified the officers' actions up to this point and provided a legal basis for the charges they would file. It also addressed the conflicting witness statements. Although some had insisted it was fireworks, physical evidence proved otherwise. This underscores a central principle of policing: the importance of tangible evidence in resolving disputes and determining the truth. Once the nature of the incident was clear, officers began processing the individuals involved. Martinez, along with others present, was taken to the police department for further questioning. The process involved ensuring suspects understood their rights, confirming their identities, and documenting their involvement. Officers maintained clear communication, explaining procedures and charges. This step demonstrated adherence to protocol while also showing sensitivity to the complexity of the situation. The scene at this point remained tense but more controlled. Officers worked to calm remaining residents, reassuring them that the situation was under control and explaining why arrests had been necessary. This communication was important for preventing further escalation and maintaining trust in law enforcement. Officers also made a point to separate juveniles from adult suspects, recognizing legal and safety requirements. This reflected a careful balance between enforcement and protecting vulnerable individuals. The emotional dynamics of this phase were significant. Family members argued, pleaded, and in some cases resisted the arrests. Officers responded with patience but firmness, ensuring that the processing of suspects was done without further physical confrontation. They sought to avoid unnecessary escalation while making it clear that the incident was serious and that there would be consequences. This balance of firmness and de-escalation is a key skill in policing, especially in situations that have already involved conflict. Charges were formally brought against Martinez and another suspect, Justice. Martinez faced weapons offenses and aggravated assault, while Justice was charged with weapons offenses and obstruction. These charges reflected both the severity of the incident and the evidence gathered by officers. Charging decisions are not taken lightly. They involve careful review of witness statements, physical evidence, and the specifics of the confrontation. This stage underscored how thorough investigative work culminates in formal legal action. Another important aspect of Section 4 was the handling of juvenile involvement. Maya, a minor present during the incident, was released with charges pending. This decision reflects legal considerations around juvenile justice, where the emphasis is often on rehabilitation and protection rather than immediate punitive action. Officers ensured Maya's safety and legal rights while processing her involvement, illustrating sensitivity to both legal requirements and community trust. The resolution phase also involved logistical challenges. Officers had to transport suspects, process statements, and ensure all evidence was secured. This required coordination between officers on scene and those at headquarters. Maintaining chain of custody for evidence, particularly the handgun and casings, was crucial to ensuring the integrity of the case. This part of the process illustrates the procedural backbone of policing: careful documentation, adherence to legal standards, and clear communication. The final moments of the incident saw officers reflecting on the complexity of the case. They discussed the challenges they had faced: contradictory witness statements, resident resistance, communication barriers, and the need to maintain control without excessive force. These reflections are a normal part of policing, as officers analyze what happened to learn and improve future responses. The incident provided important lessons about crowd management, evidence gathering, and the importance of clear communication. From the community perspective, the resolution brought mixed reactions. Some residents expressed frustration at the arrests, insisting the gunfire had been harmless celebration. Others recognized the seriousness of discharging a firearm in a residential area and expressed relief that the police had acted decisively. This range of reactions underscores the delicate relationship between law enforcement and the community, a relationship that depends on transparency, trust, and consistent adherence to legal and ethical standards. By the close of Section 4, the scene had been resolved. Officers had secured suspects, confirmed the nature of the incident, processed arrests, and ensured proper legal procedures were followed. The chaotic gunshot call had transformed into a structured investigative and enforcement process, ending with clear legal consequences. This resolution emphasized the importance of a methodical approach to policing, one that balances immediate action with careful investigation, procedural fairness, and attention to community impact. In some Section 4 shows that resolving such incidents is more than just making arrests. It requires evidence gathering, careful processing, attention to legal standards, and managing community relations. The aftermath of this incident illustrates the complexity of modern policing, where the resolution of a single call involves not only addressing a crime but also navigating human behavior, legal responsibilities, and the long-term implications for trust between police and the public.